All right, let's dive into a pretty wild story from 20th century philosophy. It's about a time when the whole idea of right and wrong was basically on life support, on the verge of becoming totally meaningless. And it's the story of how a few brilliant minds came to its rescue.
I know, it sounds like a completely ridiculous question, right? But believe it or not, for a while, this was the central problem that had moral philosophy tied up in knots. The very language we use to talk about ethics was under attack, and it threatened to make all our moral debates completely and utterly pointless.
So, how in the world did we get here? Well, our story kicks off with a philosophical movement that basically put the entire concept of morality on trial. The argument? That our deepest, most cherished ethical beliefs might not actually mean anything at all. This really radical idea was called emotivism. It came out of the school of thought called logical positivism, which had a very strict rule. They said for a statement to have any meaning, it has to be one of two things. Either logically true, like 2 plus 2 equals 4, or something you can prove with evidence. But moral statements, like being charitable is good, well, they don't fit in either box. And what's so fascinating here is just how bluntly A.J. Ayer puts it. He argued that when you say something is wrong, you're not actually describing a fact about the world. Not at all. You're just expressing your personal feelings. Basically, just saying boo or hooray. You're not adding any real factual information to the conversation. And you gotta understand, this wasn't just some abstract game for academics. This was a huge deal. If Ayer was right, then debating whether something is right or wrong is no more meaningful than arguing about whether vanilla ice cream is better than chocolate. The whole project of ethics, from Aristotle all the way to today, was suddenly at risk of being thrown out as complete nonsense.
But philosophy wasn't about to just roll over and accept this. In the face of this huge crisis, a series of really powerful counterarguments started to emerge, and each one was designed to rescue our moral language and give meaning back to the word good.
So 3 major lines of defense were thrown up. And these weren't just tiny tweaks. They were brand new ways of thinking about what we're even doing when we talk about right and wrong. First up, you've got R.M. Hare and prescriptivism. He basically said, wait a minute, the emotivists are missing the entire point of moral language. It's not supposed to be descriptive, like saying the sky is blue. It's prescriptive. It's a command. It's a universal instruction about how people should act. So it's a completely different kind of language, one that's designed to guide what we do. Okay, next, the philosopher John Searle took a totally different route. He argued that you absolutely can get a moral ought from a factual is, and he lays it out just like this. Look, Jones saying the words "I promise" is a plain fact. You can observe it. And by the very definition of what a promise is, he's created an obligation for himself. Therefore, it's now a fact that Jones is under an obligation, which means he morally ought to pay up.
And that's the genius of it, right? A promise is what Searle called a speech act. It's a use of language that isn't just describing the world, it's actively changing our social reality. It's creating a moral bond that wasn't there before. The morality is literally baked right into the action itself. And finally, Elizabeth Anscombe jumped into the fray with this really powerful historical argument. She said, look, our whole idea of a moral law is actually a leftover from a Judeo-Christian worldview. If you take away the divine lawgiver, God, she argued, then the very concept of a universal binding moral law kind of stops making sense. And that forces us to completely rethink where our ethics even come from. So, with these brilliant counterattacks, the existential crisis was over. Philosophers had successfully defended the idea that moral language wasn't just emotional noise. But this victory did more than just get things back to normal. It actually cleared the way for ethics to become more practical and more relevant than ever before. This was a massive turning point. The debate shifted away from what's called meta-ethics, these super abstract questions about what words even mean, and it got back to normative ethics, which tackles the urgent, real-world questions of how we should actually live our lives and build our societies. Suddenly, the classic questions were back on the table, front and center. Once it was established that it wasn't meaningless to talk about good and just, philosophers could finally get back to the hard work of figuring out what those words actually demand from us in the real world. And this set the stage for the defining ethical debate of our time. Because, once you agree that ethics actually means something, the next question is pretty obvious, right? What does it look like in practice?
This new era gave rise to a powerful clash of ideas that still shapes our world today. Should morality be about following the right rules, or should it be about building the right kind of character? Two philosophical heavyweights emerged to represent these two competing views. On one side, you have John Rawls, who championed a rule-based approach. His focus was on actions. He wanted to figure out a universal system for justice and rights. So for him, the key question was, what is the right thing to do? But on the other side, you've got Alasdair MacIntyre. He argued for a return to virtue, focusing on character. He believed good communities are what create good people. For him, the question was, what does it mean to be a good person?
Rawls's big game-changing idea was this thought experiment he called the veil of ignorance. Imagine you had to design the rules of society from scratch, but you didn't know if you'd be born rich or poor, powerful or weak. He argued that any rational person would create a system based on pure fairness, a social contract with rules that protect everybody, especially the people who have the least. For Rawls, justice is all about the quality of the rules. MacIntyre, though, he looked at this focus on abstract rules and basically said, nope, this is a dead end. He argued that modern ethics had become this fragmented mess of competing ideas that left us all morally lost. His solution? Let's bring back the classical idea of virtue ethics. Instead of obsessing over universal rules for every little action, we should focus on building character traits, things like courage, honesty, and justice within our communities and traditions.
And listen, this isn't just some dusty old debate for philosophers. You see this tension playing out everywhere. Think about politics. Is a just society one that has perfectly written laws, or is it one that's full of citizens with a strong sense of civic duty? Or in business, do we just need more regulations, or do we need more leaders with actual integrity? It's the same fundamental conflict. Do we prioritize the systems, or do we prioritize the people?
So that leaves us with the big question this whole story has been building to. After saving morality from meaninglessness, we're now faced with this profound choice about its future. If we want to create a more just, more ethical world, where should we place our trust? In perfecting our rules or in cultivating our own character?